The morning sun cast long shadows across the suburban street in Westfield, New Jersey, as I stood on the front porch of my childhood home, keys trembling in my hand. The "sold" sign swayed gently in the October breeze, and I couldn't help but smile through my tears. My name is Sarah Mitchell, I'm 28 years old, and this is the story of how I went from being called a burden to becoming the owner of everything my parents thought they'd never lose. Growing up in this modest two-story colonial, I was the only child of Robert and Linda Mitchell. Dad worked as a mid-level manager at a local insurance company, while Mom stayed home, spending her days watching soap operas and complaining about everything from the weather to the neighbor's lawn care. They weren't wealthy, but they weren't poor either, just your typical middle-class American family living paycheck to paycheck, yet somehow always finding money for Dad's weekend golf games and Mom's weekly shopping trips to the mall. The problems started when I was in high school. While other parents were encouraging their kids to pursue college and careers, mine seemed annoyed by my ambitions. When I announced I wanted to study business administration at Rutgers University, Dad rolled his eyes and said, "College is a waste of money. You should just get a job at the mall like the Thompson girl." Mom nodded in agreement, adding, "Sarah's always been a dreamer. She needs to learn to be more realistic." But I was determined. I worked 2 part-time jobs throughout senior year, one at a local diner serving coffee to truckers at 5 a.m., and another at a retail store folding clothes until 11 p.m. I saved every penny, applied for scholarships, and when I finally got accepted to Rutgers with partial financial aid, I thought my parents would be proud. Instead, they were irritated. "So you're just going to abandon us?" Mom asked, her voice dripping with passive-aggressive disappointment. "After everything we've done for you?" "I'm not abandoning anyone," I replied, packing my few belongings into cardboard boxes. "I'm trying to build a future." Dad looked up from his newspaper, his reading glasses perched on his nose. "Future? You're going to rack up debt and come crawling back here in 4 years with a useless degree and no job prospects. Mark my words." College was tough, but not in the way they predicted. I thrived academically, made lifelong friends, and discovered I had a real talent for business strategy and marketing. I worked on campus to pay for textbooks and ramen noodles, often studying until 2 a.m. in the library while my roommates partied. During breaks, I'd come home to find my parents had converted my bedroom into Mom's craft room, complete with a sewing machine and boxes of fabric scattered across my old desk. "Oh, we didn't think you'd mind," Mom said casually when I mentioned it. "You're hardly ever here anyway." The subtle digs continued throughout my college years. When I made Dean's List, Dad's response was, "Don't let it go to your head." When I landed a prestigious internship at a marketing firm in Manhattan, Mom worried I was getting too big for my britches. It was as if my success was somehow threatening to them, a reminder of opportunities they'd never pursued themselves. After graduation, I moved to New York City with $800 in my bank account and a dream. I shared a cramped studio apartment in Queens with 2 other girls, sleeping on an air mattress and eating canned soup for dinner more nights than I care to remember. But I was free, and I was building something. My first job was at a small digital marketing agency in Soho, where I worked 60-hour weeks for barely above minimum wage. But I absorbed everything like a sponge, learning about social media strategy, content creation, client relations, and business development. Within 2 years, I was promoted to account manager. By year 4, I was running my own team. During this time, my relationship with my parents remained strained but cordial. I'd call every Sunday, enduring Mom's complaints about her back pain and Dad's rants about politics. I'd visit during major holidays, bringing expensive wine and gifts, hoping to bridge the gap between us. But there was always an underlying tension, a sense that they saw my success as a betrayal of their modest expectations. The turning point came when I turned 26. I'd been working at the marketing agency for 5 years and had saved enough money to start my own consulting business. I specialized in helping small businesses build their online presence, something I was passionate about and genuinely good at. My client list grew through word of mouth, and within 6 months, I was making more money than I'd ever imagined possible. That's when I made what I thought was a generous offer to my parents. I called them on a Sunday evening in March, excitement bubbling in my voice. "Mom, Dad, I have some great news," I began. "My business is doing really well, and I'd love to help you guys out. I know Dad's been worried about retirement, and I thought maybe I could contribute to your savings or help with the mortgage payments." There was silence on the other end of the line. Then Dad cleared his throat. "Sarah, we appreciate the offer, but we don't need your charity." "It's not charity," I protested. "I'm your daughter. I want to help." "You want to help?" Mom's voice was sharp. "Then stop rubbing your success in our faces. We're perfectly fine without your money." The conversation ended awkwardly, but I didn't think much of it at the time. I figured they were just being proud, that eventually they'd come around. I was wrong. The real blow came 6 months later, during Thanksgiving dinner. I'd driven down from New York, bringing my then-boyfriend Marcus, a wonderful man I'd met through work who treated me like a queen. We'd been dating for 8 months, and I was hoping my parents would finally see that I'd built a good life for myself. The dinner was tense from the start. Dad barely acknowledged Marcus, and Mom made several pointed comments about career women who think they're too good for family. But the breaking point came when Marcus complimented me on my business success. "Sarah's incredible," he said, cutting into his turkey. "She's built her client base from nothing, and she's helping so many local businesses thrive. You must be really proud." Dad set down his fork and looked directly at me. "Proud? Of what?" "Sarah's always been a burden, even as a kid. Always demanding attention, always thinking she deserves better than what we could give her." The words hit me like a physical blow. Mom nodded in agreement, adding, "Some children are grateful for what their parents sacrifice. Others just take and take and take." Marcus looked uncomfortable, but I was beyond caring about social niceties. "A burden?" I repeated, my voice barely above a whisper. "I worked 2 jobs to pay for college. I've never asked you for money. I've sent you birthday and Christmas gifts every year. I offered to help with your retirement. How exactly have I been a burden?" "You were an expensive child," Dad said matter-of-factly. "Food, clothes, school supplies, extracurricular activities. Do you know what it costs to raise a kid these days? And for what? So you can move to the city and act like you're better than us?" I stood up from the table, my hands shaking. "I'm done." Marcus and I left that night, and I didn't speak to my parents for months. The pain was overwhelming, not just the words themselves, but the realization that this was how they'd always seen me. Not as their daughter, but as a financial burden, an inconvenience they'd endured for 18 years. But pain, I learned, can be a powerful motivator. I threw myself into my work with renewed intensity. My consulting business expanded rapidly, and I started investing in real estate, small properties at first, then larger commercial spaces. I had a natural instinct for spotting undervalued assets and turning them into profitable ventures. Within a year, I'd built a small portfolio that was generating passive income. During this time, I also did something I'd never done before. I hired a private investigator to look into my parents' financial situation. I told myself it was just business curiosity, but deep down, I knew I was looking for leverage. What I discovered was both shocking and infuriating. My parents weren't just middle class, they were drowning in debt. Dad's gambling problem, which I'd never known about, had consumed their savings. Mom's shopping addiction had maxed out 7 credit cards. They'd taken out a second mortgage on the house 2 years earlier and were already behind on payments. The insurance company where Dad worked was downsizing, and his job was far from secure, but the most shocking discovery was a series of emails between my parents and a financial advisor, discussing their estate planning. In these emails, they'd explicitly stated that they had no intention of leaving me anything in their will. "Sarah has made it clear she doesn't need us," Mom had written. "She can take care of herself." I stared at the computer screen in my Manhattan office, reading those words over and over. They'd written me out of their will based on their interpretation of my independence as rejection. The irony was devastating. That's when I started making calls. The first call was to the bank holding their mortgage. As a successful business owner with excellent credit, I inquired about purchasing distressed properties in their area. The loan officer was very interested in working with me. The second call was to their mortgage company. I learned that the house was scheduled for foreclosure proceedings within 90 days. My parents were 3 months behind on payments, and their options were limited. The third call was to a real estate attorney who specialized in foreclosure purchases. We discussed the legal implications of buying a property from a bank when it belonged to family members. Everything was completely legal, he assured me. Business was business. I spent the next month crafting my plan. It wasn't about revenge, exactly, it was about justice. My parents had called me a burden, had written me out of their will, had dismissed my success as somehow insulting to them. They'd made it clear that they saw our relationship as transactional, that they'd kept a ledger of every dollar they'd spent on me as a child. Fine. I could be transactional too. The foreclosure auction was scheduled for a cold Tuesday morning in January. I drove down from New York the night before, staying at a hotel near the courthouse. I'd done my homework. The property was worth approximately $340,000 in good condition, but needed about $30,000 in repairs. The outstanding mortgage balance was $280,000. I wasn't the only bidder at the auction, but I was the most prepared. I'd secured financing in advance and had a clear understanding of the property's value. When the auctioneer called for opening bids, I waited. Other bidders started at $200,000. I let them exhaust themselves, driving the price up to $265,000, then made my move. $280, I called out. The room went quiet. At $280,000, I was essentially paying off the entire mortgage balance, leaving no equity for my parents. The other bidders dropped out one by one, recognizing that the margins were too thin. Going once, going twice, sold to bidder number 47. I walked up to complete the paperwork, my hands surprisingly steady. The clerk handed me the keys to my childhood home, and I felt a strange mix of satisfaction and sadness. I now owned the house where I'd grown up, where I'd been called a burden, where I'd been told I'd never amount to anything, but owning the house was just the beginning. I knew my parents would find out about the foreclosure within days, but I wanted to be the one to tell them. I drove to the diner where Dad often had breakfast after his unemployment meetings. Yes, I'd learned he'd been laid off months earlier and hadn't told me. I found him in a corner booth, hunched over a cup of coffee and a newspaper. He looked older than I remembered, his hair thinner, his shoulders more stooped. For a moment, I almost felt sorry for him. Dad. He looked up, surprised. Sarah? What are you doing here? I slid into the booth across from him. I wanted to talk to you about the house. His face immediately tensed. What about it? I know you're behind on the mortgage. I know you're facing foreclosure. He started to speak, but I held up my hand. I also know about the gambling debts, the credit card bills, and the fact that you've been unemployed for 4 months. His face went pale. How do you? I bought the house, Dad. Yesterday. At the foreclosure auction. The silence stretched between us like a chasm. Dad's coffee cup rattled against the saucer as he set it down with shaking hands. You what? I bought the house. It's mine now. Legally, completely mine. His face cycled through several emotions: shock, anger, confusion, and finally, something that might have been fear. You can't do that. That's our home. Was your home, I corrected. Now it's mine. And I have a proposition for you. I pulled out a folder I'd prepared and slid it across the table. Inside were rental agreements, property assessments, and a detailed breakdown of the house's current condition. You and Mom can continue living there as my tenants. The rent will be $1,800 per month, which is actually below market rate for the area. You'll be responsible for utilities and basic maintenance. I'll handle major repairs and improvements. Dad stared at the papers as if they were written in a foreign language. You're charging us rent to live in our own house? It's not your house anymore, I said calmly. It's mine. And yes, I'm charging rent. That's how business works. You taught me that everything has a price, remember? You kept a ledger of every dollar you spent on me as a child. Well, now I'm keeping a ledger too. He looked up at me, and I saw something I'd never seen before in my father's eyes: respect mixed with fear. Sarah, I know we haven't always seen eye to eye, but we're your parents. Doesn't that mean something? It means you get to rent from me instead of being evicted by the bank, I replied. It means you get to stay in the house you raised me in, the house where you called me a burden. It means you get to wake up every morning and remember that your daughter, the one you wrote out of your will, is now your landlord. The meeting with Mom went about as well as expected. She cried, she yelled, she accused me of being vindictive and cruel. But in the end, she signed the rental agreement too. They didn't have a choice. Moving back into my childhood home as the owner was surreal. I'd kept my apartment in New York, but I spent weekends in New Jersey, slowly renovating the property. I updated the kitchen, refinished the hardwood floors, and converted the basement into a modern office space where I could work when I was in town. My parents adapted to their new reality with varying degrees of grace. Dad became quieter, more respectful. He started asking about my business, showing genuine interest for the first time. Mom remained bitter, but she paid her rent on time and kept the house clean. The real transformation came about 6 months later. I was in the kitchen, testing out the new appliances I'd installed, when Dad knocked on the door. Sarah? Can we talk? I looked up from the instruction manual I was reading. Sure, Dad. What's up? He sat down at the kitchen table, the same table where he'd carved the Thanksgiving turkey, and called me a burden. I owe you an apology, he said quietly. Actually, I owe you several apologies. I set down the manual and gave him my full attention. I was wrong about you, he continued. I was wrong about college, wrong about your business, wrong about everything. You weren't a burden. You were the best thing your mother and I ever did, and we were too stupid and proud to see it. The words I'd waited my whole life to hear were finally coming, but they felt complicated now. Part of me wanted to forgive him immediately. Part of me wanted to make him hurt a little longer. What changed your mind? I asked. He laughed, but it was a sad sound. Having to write you a rent check every month. Having to ask permission to paint the bathroom. Having to live in a house that belongs to the daughter we called a burden. He paused. You know what the worst part is? You're a better landlord than we ever were parents. You fixed the heater the day after we mentioned it was making noise. You replaced the roof without being asked. You treat this house, our home, better than we ever treated you. I felt tears starting to form, but I wasn't ready to let him off the hook completely. Do you know what hurt the most? I asked. It wasn't the words. It was finding out that you'd written me out of your will. That you decided I didn't deserve to inherit anything because I'd been successful on my own. Dad's face crumpled. We thought you didn't need us. We thought you'd moved on from us. I moved away from you, I corrected. There's a difference. I moved away because I had dreams and ambitions. But I never stopped loving you. I never stopped wanting your approval. I offered to help with your retirement, remember? I brought Marcus to meet you. I called every Sunday for years. We were intimidated, he admitted. Your success made us feel like failures. Instead of being proud, we were defensive. Instead of celebrating your achievements, we acted like they were attacks on our choices. The conversation continued for 2 hours. We talked about my childhood, about their fears and insecurities, about the financial problems that had been building for years. Dad admitted to the gambling problem, explaining how it had started as a way to cope with stress at work, and had spiraled into an addiction. Mom's shopping was similar, a way to feel better about their shrinking bank account and growing irrelevance. We made you into the villain, Dad said finally. It was easier than admitting we'd screwed up our own lives. Over the following months, my relationship with my parents slowly began to heal. They attended therapy, both individually and together. Dad joined Gamblers Anonymous and found a new job at a smaller insurance company. Mom returned some of her unused purchases and got a part-time job at a local bookstore. I started joining them for dinner occasionally, cooking in the kitchen I'd renovated. We talked about my business, my relationship with Marcus, who had proposed 6 months earlier, and even their grandchildren's hopes. It was strange eating meals in the house I owned with the parents who were now my tenants, but it was also oddly healing. The real test came a year later, when I got an offer to sell the house. A developer wanted to buy several properties in the neighborhood for a new shopping complex. The offer was $475,000, a significant profit on my investment. I sat my parents down in the living room and explained the situation. I want to know what you want me to do, I said. I can sell the house, and you can use your share of the proceeds to find a new place. Or I can keep it, and we can continue with our current arrangement. Mom looked confused. Our share? I smiled. I'm not the person you raised me to think I was. I'm not heartless or vindictive. You're my parents, and this is your home. If I sell, we split the profit 3 ways. If I keep it, I'll probably reduce your rent since the mortgage is paid off. Dad started crying. Actually crying. Sarah, I don't deserve this. We don't deserve this. Maybe not, I agreed. But you're getting it anyway. That's what family does. In the end, we decided to keep the house. I used some of the equity to buy 2 more rental properties in the area, building a small real estate portfolio. My parents' rent was reduced to $1,200 per month, and I established a trust fund that would eventually transfer ownership of the house back to them, with the understanding that it would pass to me when they died. The final chapter of this story came on Thanksgiving, 2 years after the foreclosure. I was hosting dinner in the house I owned, serving food in the kitchen I'd renovated, to parents who were now my tenants but also, finally, my family again. Marcus was there, wearing the engagement ring I'd bought him after his proposal. Yes. I proposed back. It's 2024, after all. My parents' attitude toward him had completely changed. They treated him like a son, asking about his work, his family, his plans for our future. As we sat around the table, Dad raised his glass of wine. I want to make a toast, he said. To Sarah, who taught us that being a burden means caring enough to carry the weight when others can't. Mom nodded, her eyes bright with tears. To our daughter, who saved us from ourselves. I looked around the table at my small, complicated family. The house where I'd grown up feeling unwanted was now mine, legally and emotionally. The parents who'd called me a burden were now my tenants, my friends, and my family again. To second chances, I said, raising my own glass. And to learning that sometimes the best revenge is building a life so good that forgiveness becomes easy. As we clicked glasses, I thought about the girl who'd left for college with $800 and a dream. She'd wanted her parents' approval so badly that she'd worked herself to exhaustion trying to earn it. Now, as a successful business owner, a loving fiancé, and a landlord to her own parents, I realized that approval had to come from within. The house that had once represented rejection now represented something else entirely, the power to choose. Love over resentment, understanding over anger, and family over pride. I'd bought my childhood home to prove a point, but I'd kept it to make a new kind of family, one built on respect, honesty, and the hard-won wisdom that comes from having To lose everything to learn what really matters. My parents still live in the house, though they're no longer my tenants. Last year, I transferred the deed back to them as a surprise for their 35th wedding anniversary. They tried to refuse, but I insisted. Consider it back payment for all those years of food, clothes, and school supplies, I told them. Plus interest. But I kept the other properties, and my real estate portfolio now includes 12 rental units across New Jersey. My consulting business has grown into a full-service marketing agency with 15 employees. Marcus and I got married last spring in the backyard of the house where I grew up, the same yard where I'd once been told I'd never amount to anything. The story could have ended with bitterness, with a daughter who bought her parents' house out of spite and left them homeless. Instead, it became a story about the complicated nature of family, the power of financial independence, and the unexpected ways that success can create opportunities for forgiveness. I learned that being called a burden wasn't really about me, it was about two people who were drowning in their own failures and needed someone to blame. I learned that revenge can be a powerful motivator, but it's not a sustainable way to live. And I learned that sometimes the best way to honor your past is to take control of it, literally and figuratively. The house still stands on the same street in Westfield, New Jersey. It's been renovated, updated, and filled with new memories. The dining room where I was called a burden is now where we host family gatherings. The bedroom that was turned into a craft room is now a nursery, waiting for the grandchildren my parents are eagerly anticipating, and sometimes, on quiet Sunday mornings, I sit on the front porch with my coffee and think about the journey that brought me here. From burden to business owner, from unwanted daughter to beloved landlord, and eventually to the person who chose to give the house back not because I had to, but because I could. The sold sign is long gone, replaced by a small garden where Mom grows tomatoes and Dad tends to his roses. But I keep a photo of that sign on my office wall, a reminder of the day I learned that the best revenge isn't getting even, it's getting ahead, then choosing to bring others along for the ride. And I didn't just buy my parents' house. I bought myself the freedom to choose what kind of daughter I wanted to be, what kind of family we could become, and what kind of legacy I wanted to leave. And that, I think, is worth more than any property deed or bank account balance. The little girl who was called a burden grew up to carry the weight of her family's mistakes, their house, their debts, and their dreams. But she also learned to carry something else, the knowledge that love, like real estate, is about location, timing, and the wisdom to know when to buy, when to hold, and when to give it all away.